The night was soft but heavy, like it carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken dreams, and she stood at the edge of the bus station clutching a worn leather bag against her chest, her fingers trembling not from fear but from a feeling she could not yet name. The city lights of Mexico flickered behind her like small stars, slowly fading away as she whispered a goodbye to everything she had ever known. Her mother's voice echoed somewhere in her heart, telling her to be brave, telling her to go even if it hurt, even if it meant she would walk alone through the noise of a foreign land. The road to America was not made of hope, it was made of dust and silence, of strange faces who didn't look back, of nights where the wind sounded like crying, in mornings where her body refused to move but her heart kept whispering adelante, just one more step forward. She told herself that even if the world was cruel she would find her place inside it, even if she had to build that place with her bare hands. The first time she saw Los Angeles, it did not look like the dream. It looked tired, it looked too big, it looked like it would swallow her whole, but still she smiled, a small quiet smile, because inside all that noise she felt a pulse, something alive, something waiting for her to begin. She slept her first night in a small shared room with 4 other women, all of them chasing the same invisible promise, each one of them carrying stories heavy enough to sink a ship, but still they laughed together like sisters who had found each other after a storm. In the morning she went looking for work. Her English was broken like a cracked window letting in bits of light, but not enough to see clearly. She knocked on doors, she smiled through rejection, and when someone finally said yes, it was to clean a small house in the suburbs, a world away from her own. The woman who hired her barely looked at her face, just handed her gloves and a mop and said, "Make it shine." The smell of cleaning products mixed with the sound of running water became her new rhythm. She scrubbed floors until her reflection looked back at her through the tiles. She dusted bookshelves that held stories she couldn't read and folded clothes that smelled like lives she didn't live. But every corner she cleaned became a quiet victory. Every stain she erased felt like she was wiping away a little bit of her own doubt. At night she would walk home with aching feet and a tired heart, but she never allowed sadness to take over. She would look at the sky and whisper to herself that she was not just cleaning houses, she was cleaning her path towards something greater. She began to dream not of escape, but of creation. She wanted to build something with her own name on it, something that could not be taken away. The other women in her building started noticing her energy. They called her Luz because her real name seemed too hard to say, and because she carried light in her eyes even when she had nothing else. She shared food when others were hungry. She shared laughter when silence was too heavy, and little by little she became the soul of that small community, a place full of women who had crossed borders and broken promises but never gave up on hope. One night after work she sat on the floor with her notebook. She drew small circles and lines, planning how she could clean more houses faster, smarter, better. She had no money for marketing, no fancy uniforms, but she had discipline and the belief that one person's hands could start something powerful. She started calling her small idea a company, even though it was just her and her borrowed mop. Cinematic cue fade into dawn light touching her face as she walks toward her first client of the day, the sound of her footsteps matching the heartbeat of a dream she doesn't yet understand. She looks at her reflection in a window, not seeing a cleaner but seeing a woman standing between what she came from and what she is about to become. The days turned into weeks, the weeks into months, and slowly she found herself cleaning not just homes but entire lives. People began to trust her. They left keys with her, they left notes of gratitude, they recommended her to friends, and soon her phone started ringing more than she could handle. She didn't know it then, but this was the beginning of her empire. And on one quiet afternoon, while she was scrubbing the marble floor of a mansion, a thought came to her clear as sunlight. Maybe this is not just survival, maybe this is purpose. She stopped for a moment, the water dripping from her gloves onto the floor like tiny diamonds. She smiled and whispered to herself, "Si puedo, yes I can." Cinematic cue close-up of her face, the reflection of light dancing in her eyes fade to black with soft music, the kind that feels like a promise. The days began before the sun. Her alarm was not a sound but the ache in her hands, the call of duty whispering through the cracks of her small apartment. She moved quietly so the others sleeping around her could dream a little longer. She packed her bucket, her rags, her faith, and stepped into the cold dawn, the city still half asleep, the air thick with fog and promise. She walked the same streets every morning, yet each step felt different, as if the earth itself began to recognize her persistence, as if it whispered, "Keep going, Luz, the world is watching," even if no one says it out loud. She cleaned houses that looked like palaces and others that looked like forgotten hearts. She treated them all the same with devotion and silent grace. Cinematic cue sunlight spilling through the curtains as she wipes a window, her reflection merging with the glow outside her face. Tired yet peaceful, the camera moves close, showing her eyes filled with quiet fire. Soon the families she worked for began to speak about her. One woman told another and another until her name passed through neighborhoods like a small legend. She started to receive calls from people she had never met asking if she could bring her magic touch, if she could make their homes feel alive again. She never said no, but she also knew she needed help. She asked 2 women from her building to join her. They were shy and unsure, but she promised them fair pay and dignity. She taught them how to work with pride, not fear, how to leave kindness behind. With every swept floor they formed something rare, a bond stronger than blood, built on shared struggle and laughter that refused to die. Cinematic cue wide shot of 3 women walking down a suburban street in worn sneakers and secondhand uniforms, the morning light washing over them like a blessing, slow music rising in the background. They named their small company Manos de Luz, hands of light, because that was what they carried into every room they touched, the light of those who refused to quit, the light of women who crossed deserts, oceans, and invisible walls to find worth. She made small cards by hand with their number and a simple phrase, cleaning homes, building dreams. She handed them out at churches, at markets, at bus stops. Work grew faster than fear could catch up. She rented a tiny office no bigger than a closet, but to her it felt like a palace. She painted the walls soft yellow and placed a small candle by the window as a promise that this light would never go out. She learned to manage schedules, to order supplies, to trust her instincts even when the world told her she was just a cleaner. Cinematic cue slow pan around the office walls lined with handwritten notes. Thank you, Luz, you changed our home, you changed my day. The camera lingers on her hands, placing a single flower in a chipped vase. Then came the moment that tested her. She was offered to clean a corporate building downtown. It was the biggest contract she had ever seen, and the manager doubted her. He looked at her accent, her clothes, her calloused fingers, and said, maybe this is too much for you. She felt the sting of all the years of being unseen, but she looked him in the eye and said, give me 1 week, I will show you what I can do. The first night in that building she and her team worked until dawn. The marble floors gleamed like rivers, the glass walls reflected the city lights back at the sky. When the manager returned he stood speechless. The silence felt like victory. She did not gloat, she simply bowed her head and said, thank you for trusting us even when you didn't. And that day she won more than a contract, she won respect. Cinematic cue camera close on her, smile subtle, humble music swelling softly. Her company grew, word spread, and soon she had more women working for her. Women who once hid their accents now spoke proudly. Women who once feared their reflection now stood taller than the towers they cleaned. She watched them laugh during lunch breaks, sharing stories about their children, their dreams, their newfound strength, and she realized that what she was building was not just a business, it was a sisterhood. Night after night she returned home exhausted but full. Her small apartment now had a new sound, not of loneliness but of hope. She would sit by the window, look at the stars, and whisper, gracias mama, I'm doing it, I'm really doing it. Cinematic cue exterior night view of city lights twinkling below her window, the reflection of her candle flickering beside her face, soft violin rising, fade to black. Success had begun to whisper through her days like a melody, soft and steady, but even music has moments where silence breaks through. And one evening, as the sun drowned behind gray clouds, she received a call that shook her quiet world. Her mother was sick back home, the kind of sickness that no medicine could promise to heal. Her heart tightened. She sat on the edge of her small office desk, the hum of the city fading to nothing but the echo of her own breath. Cinematic cue slow zoom on her face, tears forming but refusing to fall. Camera pans to a framed photo of her mother placed near the candle flame, trembling gently in the wind. She wanted to fly back instantly to hold her mother's hands, to whisper that all the miles and all the work had not been for nothing, but the money she saved was tied to her growing company. Her team depended on her. The women she had lifted now looked to her for guidance. She faced the impossible choice between the family she left and the family she built. Her heart a battlefield between love and duty. She chose to stay. She worked harder, hoping that somehow the hours she poured into shining floors would reach her mother as light in the dark. She sent money every week, called every night, listened to her mother's fading voice wrapped in courage, pretending she was getting better so Luz could keep chasing her dream. Cinematic cue night rain against glass, reflections of city lights like broken stars, her face illuminated by the phone screen as she whispers, Te amo mama, hold on for me. Months passed and then the call came, silence on the other end, the kind that breaks even the strongest hearts. She dropped to her knees, the mop falling beside her, the sound echoing through the empty house she was cleaning. She cried until the floor beneath her glistened, not from water, But from grief she whispered, forgive me for not being there," and yet in her chest something else stirred, not anger, not regret, but resolve. She decided her mother's name would never fade. She renamed her company Luz y Esperanza, Light and Hope, because that was what her mother had given her from the start. She gathered her team and told them they would not only clean, they would rebuild, they would help women who had lost everything start again. They began offering jobs to mothers who had fled violence, to widows, to dreamers who carried nothing but faith, and soon her company became more than business, it became sanctuary. Cinematic cue: warm sunrise over women laughing while loading supplies into small vans, their uniforms freshly washed, their faces shining with purpose, gentle guitar in background rising with the light. The city began to notice. Articles were written about her, local news filmed small segments calling her the woman who turned dust into dignity. She smiled shyly during interviews, her words humble, her accent thick, but her message clear: we are all capable of building beauty with our own hands. But success carries its own storms. Some competitors tried to undercut her, some clients doubted a woman-led immigrant company, some of her early helpers left chasing easier paths, yet she remained steady like a mountain beneath the rain. She learned to lead with grace, not anger, with example, not command. One night when exhaustion pressed heavy on her chest, she visited the first house she had ever cleaned. She stood outside the gate watching the lights inside flicker softly. She remembered her first day, the trembling of her fingers, the fear of not being enough, and she smiled, the same small quiet smile she had carried from the bus station years ago. Cinematic cue: slow camera pan from her old mop leaning against the wall to her company van parked nearby bearing her logo, Light and Hope, the reflection of both shimmering in the puddle below. Inside her heart she felt her mother's presence, not as sorrow but as strength. She whispered, I made it, Mama, and tomorrow I will help others make it too. Fade out with soft piano melody. The screen darkens, leaving the faint outline of her standing beneath the night sky, her silhouette strong, her eyes lifted toward the stars. The morning rose gently across the city and her heart beat with the rhythm of new beginnings. The women gathered in the small office, their laughter weaving through the hum of coffee and sunlight. She looked around and saw not workers but warriors, their eyes bright with pride, their hands steady with purpose. She realized the dream had grown beyond her name, it had become a living thing breathing through each of them. She watched as they packed supplies, marked schedules, planned routes, everything once done by her alone now carried by many. She felt a quiet gratitude fill the air, it tasted like freedom. Every house they entered now carried more than cleaning, it carried healing. A lonely widow found company in their chatter, a young mother learned courage from their smiles, a man burdened by grief found calm in the order they left behind, and Luz began to understand that work born from love becomes something sacred. There were days when exhaustion bent their backs but joy lifted their spirits. Every paycheck she handed out was not just money, it was dignity wrapped in paper, proof that they belonged, that they mattered. Cinematic pause camera would linger on faces of women singing softly as they worked, their voices rising above the sound of brooms like prayer. Word spread across neighborhoods, then cities. Invitations arrived from schools, community centers, churches, asking her to speak about her journey. She stood on small stages, trembling but determined, sharing her truth that worth is not measured by origin or accent but by the light we bring into the world. She spoke of her mother, of sacrifice, of the power in ordinary hands. She watched tears shimmer in the eyes of strangers and felt the distance between them vanish. She was no longer invisible, she was a voice. The company continued to grow, vans painted with the logo Light and Hope moving through streets like gentle comets, and she began hiring men too, teaching them the same respect that had built her empire. She believed equality was not a word but an action. Yet deep inside she stayed humble, still taking a broom in her hand from time to time to remind herself where she came from. The scent of soap and lemon brought her peace more than any award could ever give. And when night fell she often stood on her office balcony watching the lights of the city pulse below her, whispering to herself, this is for you, Mama, this is for every woman who ever doubted her own strength. Fade into slow silence, her silhouette framed by the glow of countless windows, each one a small universe she helped keep bright. Success has a sound, it is quiet, not loud, it moves through the room like wind through curtains unseen, but felt, it touches everything, changes everything. One morning she arrived at the office and found her team waiting with flowers and tears. They had been chosen for an award for women in business. She stood frozen, unsure how to feel. She had never dreamed of trophies, only of peace. But when she saw the pride in their faces, she realized this moment was not hers alone, it belonged to all of them. The ceremony lights were bright, almost too bright. She walked to the stage, her simple dress brushing against the floor, her hands trembling. As she took the microphone, she looked at the crowd and saw people in suits with soft smiles that did not know the taste of hunger or the weight of starting over, and for a second she felt small, but then she remembered her mother, her team, her journey, and she spoke not with perfect English but with perfect truth. She told them about the power of hands that clean and hearts that build, about the strength that grows from struggle, about the beauty hidden in simple work. Cinematic pause, the crowd quiet, the light soft on her face, her words flowing like prayer. After that night, everything changed. Clients multiplied, investors called her name, echoed in newspapers and screens, but fame carries shadows. People began to copy her, some questioned her story, some accused her of making it sound prettier than it was. She learned that success attracts not only love but envy. She learned that even light can blind if it shines too hard. She grew tired, sometimes wondering if she had lost herself in the noise, but each time doubt came, she returned to the beginning. She visited the streets where she once walked with her bucket and mop. She breathed the air of those mornings and remembered that the empire she built was not of glass and gold, it was of sweat and hope. One day she met a young girl cleaning a small cafe. The girl looked scared of being seen. Luz smiled and offered her a job. The girl hesitated, afraid of promises, but Luz told her, "You remind me of me," and that was enough. As months passed, that girl became her assistant, strong, brave, learning fast, and one afternoon she told Luz, "You gave me more than work, you gave me a life." Luz smiled softly because she finally understood the true meaning of empire. It was not about how big it grew but how many hearts it touched. Cinematic fade, slow motion of women laughing in sunlight, vans driving into the horizon, children waving from windows, their reflections like stars across the city. At night, Luz sat alone on her balcony again. The sky stretched wide above her, and for the first time in years she felt light, not from success, not from money, but from peace. She whispered to the wind, "Thank you, Mama, thank you for the courage to begin." The candle by her window flickered once, then steadied. The city breathed, and the world kept turning. The seasons moved softly across the city, time melting into the rhythm of work and laughter and dreams. Her company had grown to hundreds of hands, each pair carrying stories she would never fully know, but she saw them in the quiet moments, in the way they wiped sweat from their brows or shared bread on lunch breaks. She felt their strength as an echo of her own. She had built an empire, but it was their hands that kept it alive. Years flowed like rivers, quiet, steady, and full of memory. Her empire stood tall and strong, but Luz had begun to look beyond buildings and balance sheets. She felt time whispering through her hair, silver strands glimmering like threads of moonlight. She spent more time walking through neighborhoods where she once lived, her steps slower, her eyes softer. She saw new families arriving, carrying the same dreams she once held, and she felt her heart stretch wide with tenderness. One morning she visited a small community center she had helped build. There were children learning English, their voices mixing with laughter. She sat in the back of the room unnoticed and watched as a little girl helped her mother read a storybook. The woman struggled with the words but smiled through it, and Luz felt tears rise because she saw herself in that woman, saw her mother in her too, the same courage, the same love that never asked for rest. When class ended, the teacher recognized her and asked her to speak. The children gathered around her, their faces bright as sunlight, and she told them a story not about business or money, but about the day she first arrived in this country with fear in her chest and fire in her heart. She told them that dreams are not gifts, they are gardens you must water with patience. She told them that no one is small who carries love inside them. The room was silent, then full of applause, but she smiled quietly because she knew they were not clapping for her, they were clapping for hope. As she left the building, a woman approached her, the same one from the class. She held her daughter's hand and said, "You changed our lives." Luz shook her head. "No, you changed your own. I only held the door open." The woman hugged her, and in that moment Luz understood that legacy is not a monument, it is a mirror in which others see possibility. Months passed, and she began to step back from daily work. Her trusted team now led the company with grace. She spent her mornings tending a small garden behind her house, tomatoes, basil, marigolds. She said the soil spoke the same language as her heart. It remembered everything and forgave everything. At night, she would light a candle and write letters to the women she had met over the years, letters she would never send, just words of gratitude drifting through ink and time. One evening, as the sun bled gold across the sky, she sat with her assistant on the porch, the same girl who once cleaned a cafe, now a leader with her own dreams. They watched the light fade, and the younger woman asked, "What will you do now?" Luz smiled. "I will keep building," she said, "not companies but people, because people are forever." There was silence between them, soft and kind, the kind that holds no sadness, only understanding. The younger woman took her hand and said, "You built more than an empire, you built a family." Luz looked out toward the horizon, her eyes glistening, and whispered, "That was always the plan." The city glowed below them, alive with stories born of struggle and hope. The wind carried distant music, and for the first time she did not feel like a visitor. She felt like part of the land itself. Roots deep, wings wide, the immigrant who had built an empire from dust, now becoming the soil that would grow others. And as the first star appeared above the rooftops, she whispered to it softly, "Thank you for letting me belong." The night moved gently like a lullaby through the open windows of her home. She slept less these days, not because of worry but because her mind was full of peace. She would sit by the candle near her window and watch the light dance across the walls. She thought of her mother, often wondered if she could see all that had grown from her daughter's hands and heart. She imagined her smiling, whispering, "Me, Nina, you did it." One dawn she woke early before the birds, before the city, her hands a little weaker but steady. She made coffee the same way she always had, slow, careful, the smell filling the room. She stepped outside, the sky pale and soft. She watched the sunrise and whispered the names of the women who had walked beside her through the years, some gone, some far away, all forever part of her. As the light warmed her face, she felt something stir deep inside, not sadness, not fear, but a knowing. She had spent her life chasing light, and now it lived in her. She no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. She had become the story she once searched for. Later that morning she visited her foundation, where dozens of young women were learning trades: accounting, cleaning, management. They greeted her with laughter and hugs. She moved slowly between the tables, touching shoulders, offering small pieces of advice, her voice soft, her eyes shining. One girl asked her, "How do you keep the light when life is so heavy?" And Luz smiled, the kind of smile that carries years, and said, "You do not keep it, you share it, and that is how it stays." Cinematic slow motion, her hands on the girl's shoulders, sunlight spilling through the windows, the hum of voices rising like a hymn. Afterward she sat under a tree in the courtyard, a cool breeze playing with her hair. She closed her eyes and listened to the city around her, car horns, birds, distant music. She thought of all the paths she had walked, all the doors she had cleaned before she ever opened her own. She thought of the word immigrant, how heavy it had once felt and how light it seemed now, because she had filled it with meaning. She had turned it into a song. In the afternoon she met with her team. They were planning the next expansion, but halfway through the meeting she laughed gently and said, "Maybe it is time for me to rest." They protested, of course, but she raised her hand, smiling. Rest is not the end, it is part of the work. Too, they understood because she had taught them to listen. That evening she walked along the beach, the ocean whispering like an old friend, the wind tugging at her shawl. She watched the waves roll in and out, endless, patient, full of stories. She felt herself small again, like that first day when she arrived in a foreign land, except now she was not afraid. She was home, everywhere and nowhere, belonging to all the places that had shaped her. She bent down, picked up a smooth stone and held it to her heart, saying softly, "This is for every woman who thought she could not. This is for every hand that trembled before it built." She threw the stone into the sea, watched the ripples spread outward, disappearing into the horizon, and she smiled because she knew the light would always return. The years began to fold softly one into another, days melting into golden hours, her home filled with letters from across the country, women who wrote to thank her, to tell her how their lives had changed because of her courage. She read each one slowly, sometimes aloud, as if the words were prayers. She kept them in a wooden box near her bed, tied with ribbon, the voices of strangers who had become part of her story. She no longer went to meetings or interviews. The world outside still spoke her name, but she had turned her gaze inward to smaller, quieter miracles. She spent her mornings baking bread for the neighbors. Children came to her door for stories, and she told them about journeys that begin in fear and end in light. She never mentioned money or success, only the strength that lives inside kindness. One afternoon her assistant came to visit, now a confident woman leading her own company. She brought her newborn son and placed him gently in Luz's arms, the baby's eyes wide, dark, full of wonder. Luz felt tears rise unbidden, and she whispered to the child softly, "You are what we built this world for, you and every dream yet to come." The younger woman asked her if she missed the noise of business, the meetings, the constant movement, and Luz smiled. "I miss nothing," she said, "because